My name is Mark Richert. I'm the Director of Public Policy for the American Foundation for the Blind. And AFB was founded in 1921 to be a resource to consumers, to people who are blind or visually impaired, people like myself, or the professionals who work with folks who are blind or visually impaired of all ages. So special education teachers, folks who work with adults to help them to retain or obtain a job, or especially senior citizens who are wanting to remain in their homes and live independently in their home and in the community.
Has consumer electronics technology improved the ways in which the visually impaired can access media, for example, books and movies?
I think consumer electronics have played a large role in making the lives of folks who are blind or visually impaired a bit more independent. I think it certainly is true that today we have those of us who are blind or visually impaired have more options than certainly we've ever had before.
So, turning the focus a bit more to ebooks, why might a visually impaired user want to use an ebook as opposed to a print or a braille version of the same book?
You know, years ago, blind and visually impaired folks didn't have any access to any books at all, and over time, a system of reading was developed for the blind. Braille, of course. I myself am a Braille reader. I've been a Braille reader all my life. That having been said, paper Braille isn't perhaps as much on the minds of folks who are blind and visually impaired as much as a device that can render an electronic file into Braille, for example, so that under your fingertips you can actually read a book like anybody else and read the boring, deadly dull baldness creating footnotes and materials or whatever. And so it's helpful to have a machine then that can interface with that book. If you don't have that material under your fingers, for example, to be able to scan it, you're missing sometimes where the quotations begin and end, where references are made. Inevitably, the ability to read accurately is improved by having access to it in Braille.
So, with regard to the kind of things that you were talking about that users might want to do with an electronic book, or even with another piece of digital media, say a song file or a video file, is the access to that digital media in any way affected by the technological protection measures that content distributors are using nowadays, for example, digital rights management?
Yes, unfortunately, the measures that different groups, companies, and others are employing do have an impact on the ability of someone who is blind, for example, to open up an electronic book and have a screen reader, a piece of software that actually reads aloud what's on the screen to you, or one of those Braille devices I was just talking about, to access that content. More often than one might think, there are actually, specific barriers put into place by copyright holders, where when someone who is blind or visually impaired wants to pull up an ebook and read it on the screen with one of these special pieces of software that reads the book aloud, you'll actually get a message on the screen that says this book has been disabled for access by screen readers. In other words, you get a message that absolutely says to you, if you want to have this book read to you, you find some other way to do it, or perhaps the idea is that you go off and buy an audiobook version if it's available.
So a little bit earlier, you said you were talking a little bit about challenging the rigidity in some of the law around this. I'm curious, what role has the Digital Millennium Copyright Act played in all of this?
Well, Digital Millennium Copyright Act is a very, very complicated piece of legislation, and I certainly don't purport to be an expert in it. But I will say that I think there has become such a preoccupation, is probably the nicest way I can put it, with making sure that content is protected to the exclusion of making sure that folks, frankly, who have paid good money for content, can actually access it. But what we've seen is that the DMCA is a very tangible and we think very aggressive example of this preoccupation with protecting digital rights, potentially at the expense of folks who legitimately need to get a hold of content and frankly have paid good money for it. So the law has essentially said you cannot take steps to get around those protections that are built into, for example, an ebook, so that you can get access to that content. And if you do, there are pretty severe civil and criminal potential penalties. And in the case of folks who are blind or visually impaired, the only way to get access to the content of a number of those titles that are out there is to take steps to get around those measures to protect access to content so that the material will in fact appear on the screen of your computer or what have you and allow you to read it.
So in 2002 and 2005, the American Foundation for the Blind filed with the Copyright Office requesting permission for its users, or the people that it represents rather, to circumvent the DRM that's used on ebooks. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. As you've noted in two prior proceedings, the American Foundation for the Blind filed asking the Copyright Office, asking the Librarian of Congress essentially to acknowledge that the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, as applied to blind and visually impaired folks who are simply trying to get access to the content that they've purchased, is a bit rigid, and that what we need to be able to say is that under the law, is that if a person with a disability, in my case, someone who's blind or visually impaired, wants to get access to content that he or she has purchased and finds a way to make the screen reader, that piece of software that makes the computer talk, or the little computer braille unit that hooks up with your computer so that you can physically read the book with your fingers, if you can find a way to jerry-rig that book so that you can get to the content, you should not be liable for civil or criminal penalties under the law because you've done that. So what we want to be able to do is to say, look, this exemption is available if you as an individual user come across content that your screen reader or your braille device cannot access and you can find a way to get to it. There's an exemption there for you that says don't freak out about warnings that say if you try to make that happen that you're going to be fined pretty substantially and the like.
So as someone who's obviously dealt directly with the DMCA's anti-circumvention provisions, do you have any kind of feeling for what the net effect of the act has been for those blind and visually impaired users that you guys represent?
I would say that so much of what the DMCA does is a bit remote for the average, consumer. The fact that the DMCA is the law of the land it complicates things along the lines we've just been describing, because instead of saying, as has always been the case under copyright law for hundreds of years, you penalize somebody for making a copy. This law says we're going to penalize you if you've frankly taken away some of the barriers that allow you to make a copy. So it's a little bit of a different twist. So I think the exemption is given a sense of protection, a sense that these what seem to be very, very aggressive provisions in the DMCA are not going to be used by a particularly overzealous copyright holder.